Okay, so we are at quorum, so we'd like to get started. For the record, the time is now 1:01 p.m. and we have begun the Assembly Bill 32 Environmental Justice Advisory Committee public meeting. Welcome everyone. My name is Karina Jaj and I'm the lead staff in the Office of Environmental Justice, Tribal Affairs, and Border Relations. I'm excited to be here with you all today. Before we start with order of business, housekeeping will be covered on Zoom to facilitate the public comment period and a few critical details related to the Sacramento facilities. Spanish interpretation will be provided in the Zoom Spanish channel for the duration of the meeting. We have 2 interpreters to support today's meeting. For those in the building, restrooms are outside the door to the left and down the hall by the drinking fountains. In case of an emergency, please exit out the door and to the right down the stairs. For members of the public participating remotely, you will be able to raise your hand in Zoom to speak during the public comment period. When it's your turn, the host will ask you to unmute, and after you click on the unmute button from your end, you may begin to speak. We'll be switching off between commenters in the room and on Zoom. We intend to give each commenter 3 minutes to speak, and we'll let you know if any changes are required based on the volume of comments. In the event that *6 does not work to unmute, CARB can unmute you. We appreciate you staying on mute until it's your turn to speak to be respectful of everyone's turn. Before providing your question or comment, please state your name and affiliation, if applicable, so that we know who's speaking. We'll do our best to do the same in the room for members of the public to know who's talking. Zoom Q&A and chat functions are turned off for participants. So now I'd like to introduce our Spanish interpreter that is on the line in the main channel. Carlos, if you could please introduce yourself and then translate the information on this slide.
Will do. Muy buenas tardes, su servidor Carlos Díaz de León, uno de sus 2 intérpretes para esta sesión. Como se indica en pantalla, para las personas del público que están participando de manera remota, tendrán la capacidad de levantar su mano virtual en Zoom para hacer uso de la voz durante el periodo de comentario público. Cuando sea su turno, el anfitrión le pedirá abrir su micrófono y una vez que abra su micrófono, podrá iniciar con su comentario. Estaremos intercambiando entre comentarios presenciales y vía Zoom. La intención es otorgar a cada persona 3 minutos para hablar y le avisaremos si son necesarios cambios en función del volumen de comentarios. En caso de que *6 no le permita abrir su micrófono, CARB puede abrirlo desde la sesión. Agradecemos de antemano que permanezcan con su micrófono en mudo hasta que sea su turno de hacer su comentario y ser respetuosos del turno de todos los demás. Antes de hacer su comentario para plantear su pregunta, por favor indique su nombre y afiliación, en su caso, para que sepamos quién está haciendo uso de la voz. Haremos todo lo posible por hacer lo mismo en la sala presencial para que el público sepa quién está hablando. Las funciones de preguntas y respuestas y chat en Zoom están deshabilitadas para participantes. Gracias, and thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. So for those who are participating in person, to prevent echoes, we request that you click on the symbol next to the unmute button as seen in number 1. Next, select Leave Computer Audio as seen in number 2. Also, please make sure to stay muted for the full duration of the meeting to avoid background noise as seen in number 3. Carlos, could you please provide the translated information on this slide?
Gladly. Buenas tardes. Para quienes participan presencialmente, para evitar ecos, solicitamos que si están también en Zoom, hagan clic en el símbolo justo junto al botón de abrir micrófono, como se ilustra en el número 1. Luego, dejar el audio de la computadora, como se ilustra en el punto número 2. Y además, por favor, permanezcan con el micrófono apagado durante toda la reunión para evitar ruido de fondo, como se ilustra en el número 3. Gracias, and back to you.
Thank you. So next we'll provide instructions and then we'll enable the Zoom interpretation features. When the interpretation globe appears at the bottom right corner of Zoom as seen in number 1, please choose your preferred language as English or Spanish as seen in number 2. Carlos, could you please provide these instructions in Spanish?
Gladly. Justo después de este aviso de instrucciones, se habilitará la interpretación en Zoom. Una vez que se habilite, le aparecerá un icono de interpretación que parece un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior derecha de la barra de controles de Zoom, como se ilustra en el punto número 1. Le pedimos elegir su idioma de preferencia, sea inglés o español, como se ilustra en el punto número 2. Gracias and thank you.
Thank you. If for any reason you require technical Zoom support in today's meeting, please contact Bobby Roosh, who is in person here in Sacramento, by email as provided on this slide. We'll do our best to assist you. Today's meeting is being recorded. CARB staff will post to the EJAC meetings and events website in the coming weeks. This is the same website where you can find all materials for today's meeting as provided on this slide. Carlos, could you please provide these instructions in Spanish?
Aquí en Sacramento, vía correo electrónico, como se indica en la diapositiva. Haremos todo lo posible por asistirle. La sesión de hoy se está grabando. El personal de la Junta de Recursos Atmosféricos de California, CARB, publicará esta grabación en el portal de EJAC Meetings and Events, eventos y reuniones del Comité Asesor sobre Justicia Ambiental en las próximas semanas. Este es el mismo portal donde encontrarán todos los materiales para la sesión de hoy, como se ilustra en pantalla. Gracias and thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'd like to begin the EJAC member roll call. As a reminder, this is the formal record of meeting attendance, and therefore we ask that all EJAC members respond when your name is called. Please state here your affiliation, pronouns, and if you are on or off camera. And if off, the reason for doing so consistent with our meeting requirements. For EJAC members who join the meeting later, we'll be asking for them to verbally announce their attendance in the same fashion so it is clear to all participants. So to begin, Martha Dina Arguello.
Present.
And then could you also state your affiliation, pronouns, and
Sure.
if you're on or off camera?
Marta Dina Arguello with Physicians for Social Responsibility, she, her pronouns, and I will probably be on and off camera because I'm in a noisy place. Yeah, and so.
Okay, thank you. And just so you know, your audio is a little faint right now. And then Juan Flores.
Present. I'm on camera. I'm with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. Around between 3 and 3:30, I need to be on the road. So then I'm going to switch to my phone and I would probably start being off camera around that time.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Catherine Garupa.
Good afternoon, Dr. Catherine Garupa, they and she pronouns. I'm the executive director for the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, or CVAC. I'm on camera, and if I need to go off camera, I will clarify in the chat if I'm leaving the meeting.
Okay, Kevin Hamilton. John Harriel Jr. Thomas Helm.
Present virtually. This is Tom Helm, he, him, his, Valley Improvement Projects.
Matt Holmes. Oh. Matt, can you hear us?
I can now. I'm sorry. Matt Holmes, California Environmental Justice Coalition, masculine pronouns. I want to be on and off camera.
Okay. Kevin Jefferson III.
Kevin Jefferson, present, Urban Relief.
Ray Leone. Luis Olmedo. And Jill Sherman Warren.
Jill Sherman Warren. I will be off camera. I'm on the Hoopa Indian Reservation. I am from Hoopa, and I am the executive director of the Native American Environmental Protection Coalition. My pronouns are she, her, and we're currently in a PG&E outage and have been experiencing that almost every day the last week. So I hope that my cell service doesn't drop out. But if it does, I will be back on as soon as I can.
Hey,
Okay,
this is
thank you.
Did you guys hear me earlier?
No, we didn't hear you earlier.
Oh, wow, okay. I had my phone off mute, but my vehicle I had it on mute. So Ray Leon, the Latino Equity Advocacy and Policy Institute, also known as LEAP.
Thank you. And then just gonna go to Kevin Hamilton.
Hi, Kevin Hamilton. Central California Asthma Collaborative, he, him. I will be mostly on camera, off when I'm eating or taking a quick break.
Thank you. So now I'll turn it over to our co-chairs to go over today's agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We'll start with introductions and opening remarks as usual. And then today we have a discussion on the cap and trade regulation with some expert panelists. We will also have some time to discuss our draft resolution on carbon capture use and storage, or CCUS, and direct air capture, or DAC. We'll take a quick break as time and maintaining quorum allows. We will open up for public comment, and then we will go to next steps and closing remarks.
And then Martha Dina, could you go over our meeting agreements?
Sorry. Yes. So our agreements, pay attention to equity of airtime, be present, be open and flexible in our approaches to the work, be realistic and monitor our ability to get through the full agenda. We seek out synergies in our work, use yes and, so we build on each other. If virtual, keep camera on throughout the duration of the meeting, which I'm not doing because I'm not feeling well and I have to sort of sit and stand. So I don't want to put you all through that. It makes me dizzy. State if you're going off camera and why, and I just did. If leaving the meeting, notify staff and co-chairs. Listen and be compassionate and supportive. Reach for and invite inspiration and intuition. Look for ways to move toward action where possible. Respect the agenda and trust the process. And share responsibility for success.
Thank you. So now I'd like to begin with our opening remarks, and I'll turn it over to Chanel.
Thank you, Karina. I just wanted to welcome everyone. My name is Chanel Fletcher. As Karina mentioned, I'm the Deputy Executive Officer of Equity, Communities, and Environmental Justice. To members of the public, I want to thank everyone for listening in and engaging in the EJAC public process. We also want to welcome and thank our CARB deputies, as well as the chair's office, whether they are online or in the room with us. I did want to start off by providing an exciting announcement. So as mentioned at a couple of the past EJAC meetings, we do understand the need for resources to support the ongoing EJAC. We did just execute a new facilitation and technical writer contract with Leading Resources, Inc., or just LRI. They're going to be hugely beneficial in providing both facilitation services for the EJAC public meeting moving forward, as well as assisting in developing important write-ups. So one example is that they will be working with us to help with the charter revisions and the current resolutions underway. We are very excited to have LRI on board, and they are here in the room with us today and also online, and we are looking forward to seeing how they can support the EJAC and CARB as a neutral third party moving forward. I also just wanted to flag that Steve, our executive officer, could not be here today, so he did send out a memo to the EJAC. We also publicly posted that on our webpage, really clarifying SB 905, because we got some questions about that at our last meeting. It also, I think, includes some questions or some responses, some questions that we had around cap and trade. We really do hope that's going to be useful in understanding where we're at in the process and moving forward. If there are follow-up questions from, I think, the memo that Steve shared out, please let us know, and we are happy to kind of take those back and set up a time to further discuss. Today's discussion includes two main items. So it's the discussion on the cap and trade, followed by the resolution that the EJAC has created for carbon capture utilization and storage and direct air capture. And that's both a follow-up from the June 14th EJAC public meeting. We really do believe that those are critical parts for the EJAC as we prepare for the joint meeting with the CARB board. We want to make sure that we all come into this discussion prepared and are poised to discuss the top priority issues for ourselves and I think the areas of focus going into next year's process. So with those things said, I will turn it over to our EJAC co-chairs to provide their opening remarks and kick us off in today's discussion. Thank you so much. And Catherine, I will give it back to you.
Thanks, Chanel. And Kevin Jefferson, since you're there in the room, I wanted to ask if you wanted to go first.
Sure. Just happy to be back. Missed everyone. Just a little updates on the Bay Area Air Quality Management Air District. Air District has come up with the scoping plan, of which the EJAC committee was very instrumental in formulating that scoping plan, giving recommendations. Also, our environmental justice policy is coming to finalization. We would love to share that with other air districts. Also, our community benefits fund is coming into its final phases, and we'd also like to share those activities with other air districts as well.
Thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon again, everyone. This is Dr. Catherine. As always, there's a lot to discuss. We have a robust agenda, so I'll keep my comments brief and then pass to Martha Dina before we go to our next item on cap and trade. And I want to start with some big picture reflections and then narrow it down to the everyday work that we do as a committee. We don't have to look far for examples of the unfolding climate crisis that continues to escalate. It was just a few days ago that the extreme heat for days and days and days broke just a few days ago. And it felt for me in some ways like the pandemic again, where we were sheltered in place because it was so hot that, you know, after early morning, you really didn't want to go outside. Not to mention the unprecedented Hurricane Beryl in early June, catastrophic flooding happening in different places across the world. These are just a few reminders of the accelerating impacts of the climate crisis that are impacting frontline communities first and foremost. And yet we often hear decision makers in California claim that we need all the tools in the toolbox, which is essentially saying that fossil fuels are going to continue to be a part of the mix. And that's what we see embedded in the scoping plan and in policies like the low carbon fuel standard and cap and trade that we are really trying to get away from. More and more I've heard people reminisce and bring back up adaptive management, which are conversations that happened years ago that I was never able to be a part of and would love to be able to do that kind of proactive and nimble thinking. The pandemic was just one example of cultural changes that caused a major shift in emissions. And while CARB certainly can't control all social elements, we have to do a better job of working beyond models and averages and statistics and ground truthing information and thinking about our lived reality and unknown unknowns. We have to continue to heed the call of EJAC to focus on direct reductions in environmental justice communities as part of a truly just transition off fossil fuels. So on the more practical level, I appreciate the memos from Steve Cliff and other CARB staff and the overall increased dialogue, and also want to name that it is overwhelming in terms of capacity, and the workload continues to grow for us as a committee as we're now looking at regulations and the big picture versus when the committee was temporary and just looked at the scoping plan process. I'm looking forward to working with the technical writer and the new facilitator, and certainly we're going to need a lot more capacity as our workload continues to grow. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Martha Dina.
Okay, thanks. So I don't have a lot of opening comments other than we're happy to have facilitators. I share Catherine's excitement because we do have a lot of work and that will really help us. But, you know, in preparing for today's meeting, you know, and going through the carbon capture and some reports on hydrogen, and I am again struck by the need to actually figure out how we as a community and as a committee are actually going to be heard and listened to, so that we are, as we move forward with the scoping plan, that we put some real limits on some of the strategies that we feel will make things worse for communities. So today we're talking about two of those, right? Cap and trade and carbon capture and sequestration, which, you know, we feel are not the right solutions and get us off track. but yet there seems to be, the moving train and a commitment from CARB to push these. So we really need to figure out a way as a committee to really bring that message home to the board. They are our last line of defense for our communities who are facing, the extension of the fossil fuel industry in our neighborhoods in the name of climate change, because we've waited so long to the point where now we're desperate. And so in those moments, we don't always make the best decisions. And, I always feel like our committee is a bit of a Cassandra, cursed to tell the truth and cursed to not be believed. And so I hope we can move beyond that model and begin to really integrate environmental justice communities' concerns, because it makes for better policy, including things like the adaptive management plan, including things like being able, that there is reversibility on technologies that are shifting and keeping burdens in low-income communities. And so I'm excited about our meeting today and learning from Rachel Morello-Frosch, Emmanuel Pastor, their research, but also our conversation about how to strengthen the resolution, but also how to strengthen our resolve in making sure that our communities are heard and that our knowledge and experience is respected in this process.
Thank you, Martha Dina, and again to Kevin for those, and Chanel for those opening remarks. With that, I think we can segue to the cap and trade item, and very much want to quickly get to our panelists while also setting some brief context and reminders for us as a committee. Assembly Bill 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act, did not require a cap and trade program. That was a policy choice that the Air Resources Board adopted. One of many opportunities last year, I was privileged to be on invited to participate in a panel with Dr. Manuel Pastor in conversation with the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Committee about the cap and trade program. And he astutely pointed out how trust was lost at the inception of the cap and trade program because environmental justice advocates were raising substantive concerns that weren't addressed. And those concerns, have carried forward to today. While we recognize that cap and trade isn't a catch-all and it's not going to solve all of our air pollution problems at stationary sources, the cap and trade regulation is a critical piece of the overall puzzle to how we meet climate goals. And if we're going to address equity, we need to make sure that we are not foregoing emissions reductions in frontline communities. In my own professional trajectory as an environmental justice advocate and scholar, I encountered Dr. Pastor and Dr. Morello-Frosch's work through their collaboration on Still Toxic After All These Years with Dr. Jim Sad, which also spurred many offshoots, including the San Joaquin Valley focused Land of Risk, Land of Opportunity that the UC Davis Center for Regional Change worked on with numerous groups in the San Joaquin Valley that then contributed to the development of CalEnviroScreen. So all of that is to say these two speakers definitely have deep expertise and a long history in cap and trade and many other topics. So I will definitely invite them to introduce themselves more however they would like. But with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Manuel Pastor with the University of Southern California and Dr. Rachel Morello-Frosch with UC Berkeley. And thank you so much for being here.
Hi, it's great to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Bienvenidos.
Gracias. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then pass the baton to Manuel to introduce himself. But I'm Rachel Morello-Frosch. I'm here at UC Berkeley School of Public Health. I'm an environmental health scientist and have had the privilege to work with some folks on this committee in the past. And Manuel and I have been collaborating on EJ issues related to climate change for many years, and it's a privilege to be able to speak to you today about the issue of cap and trade. Manuel?
Manuel Pastor, I'm director of the Equity Research Institute at USC. Thanks for the shout out, Ray. I just saw Ray in Fresno a couple weeks back. And I've been working with Rachel for about a quarter century at this point on environmental justice research, starting originally with documenting disparities, going on to do some effects on kids and learning, moving from there to do the beta version of Callan Virus Screen. And we are currently, we'll talk about some of the work on Gap and Trade. We're actually also engaged in evaluation of AB 617 that is just starting. So Rachel will do the first part of the presentation. I will do the middle. She will do a stirring and emotional conclusion.
Okay, so let's get started. Next slide, please. Way back when our team started thinking about the issue of climate inequities in a domestic context and produced a report called the Climate Gap. Really just, and that was quite a while ago at a time when the federal government was actually thinking about climate change way back when, and then it didn't happen. And climate inequities, as we all know, are everywhere in terms of who's impacted, who's exposed to the impacts of climate change, and who has the most ability to adapt and recover. And a key policy challenge in our state is how do we address climate, advance our climate goals, while also improving equity outcomes, which is why we're here. This is a major issue that the EJAC has been focusing on for many years. Next slide, please. So in terms of the issue of the equity impacts of climate, of cap and trade, prior work that we did published in 2018 shows that the regulated greenhouse gas emitting facilities are disproportionately located in communities of color and disadvantaged communities as defined by Callan Virus Screen. So if you go back to the prior slide, you can see on the left the number, can you go back to the prior slide? On the panel on the left, you can see that as the number of greenhouse gas facilities increases that are within 2.5 miles of a different block group, the the proportion of folks of color increases. And the same thing in terms of the Callan Virus Screen on the panel on the right. You can see that as the number of regulated greenhouse gas facilities increases, the Callan Virus Screen score worsens. Next slide, please. I think there is consensus that there are patterns of disparity in terms of who's hosting these facilities, both based on race and socioeconomic status or income prior to cap and trade, and that those inequities persist. Whether we look at a map in different areas of California and look at the locations of things like petroleum refineries, power plants, and cement kilns, and look at where they're located in terms of the demographic makeup of the neighborhoods in which they're located. Next slide, please. The other issue I think that we have consensus on is that cap and trade will yield in unequal co-benefits, and that the question of who benefits from such a program in terms of reductions of greenhouse gases and co-pollutants is an empirical question, and that is being increasingly studied. And we're going to talk, next slide, please. We're going to be talking about the different studies that have been undertaken with a focus in California and why they might be yielding slightly different results in terms of the question of co-benefits and co-pollutants. We're trying to, the methodologies of these studies differ a lot. They come from different disciplines, and our goal today is to provide a somewhat simplistic overview, for the key take-home messages to understand these different studies that have been done in California. Next slide, please. And so one of the first studies that was done to address the equity implications of cap and trade was one that we did in 2018. looking at the first compliance period of the cap and trade program. And this came in the wake of also a report that we published initially looking at the co-pollutant PM10. And then we were subsequently given access by CARB to additional data to look at other co-pollutants, which enabled us to do a more robust analysis and publish this paper that you see here. Next slide, please. So one of the key take-home messages from this early study of the first compliance period of the cap and trade program is that neighborhood racial demographics, as well as educational attainment, which is an indicator of socioeconomic status or social class, are predictors of increases in greenhouse gases and co-pollutant emissions from facilities. Can you go back to the prior slide, please? If you look at this table and look at percent people of color, what this is telling you is what are the effects of a unit increase in the proportion of people of color in the neighborhood. And you can see that the ratios there are consistently above 1, and that the confidence intervals are also consistently above 1, which means that this is a very robust and statistically significant predictor of whether or not greenhouse gas and co-pollutant levels increase during that first compliance period of the cap and trade program. Same for percent of low education attainment, again, an indicator of socioeconomic status, that was very consistently positively associated as a predictor on both ends. So here, race and class definitely matter in terms of where greenhouse gas and co-pollutants increase during that first compliance period of the cap and trade program. Next slide, please.
Dr. Rachel, 1 second. We think that the slides are timed, so they're moving on their own. So we're just going to fix that really quick and then have it on presentation mode again.
Okay.
It's probably not all of the slides, but yeah, turning off the timing would be good.
Beautiful. Okay. So in addition to those preliminary results which indicate inequities in terms of the impacts of the cap and trade program during that first compliance period, we also pointed out that the overall performance of the regulated facilities in terms of the changes in greenhouse gas emissions during that period was pretty underwhelming. So if you look at that, at this chart, these are what we call box plots, but looking at the type of facility that was regulated, everything from cement plants to refineries to power plants, etc. And so anything above that line in the middle would indicate that actually greenhouse gas emissions went up, okay? And then the ones that are below the line would indicate that in general greenhouse gas emissions went down. And so you can see that for most of these facility types, it didn't really change that much in terms of improvements in greenhouse gas emissions. And for some types of facilities, for example, cement plants and electricity generation, greenhouse gas emissions actually went up. Next slide. Okay. So that was, I think, one of the first studies to evaluate the equity implications of California's cap and trade program. And as I mentioned, it was during the first compliance period. And so the question remains whether such a pattern would persist over subsequent compliance periods. We were using a proximity analysis and not undertaking any air quality modeling, excuse me. And the data that we had access to at that time was prior to the development of the pollution mapping tool, which enabled and facilitated and made somewhat easier the linking of greenhouse gas emissions with co-pollutants. So now I'm going to pass the baton to Manuel to talk about subsequent work.
Okay, next slide, please. So early 22 saw two new studies, one by OEHA and one by our team. There was also a study from researchers at UC Santa Barbara that I'll come to, came out at about the same period. It's a little bit easier to understand sequentially after looking at the OEHA and this team's studies. The OEHA study was conducted by Laura Plummer, Amy Boudin, Alvaro Alvarado, and others. It looked at several aspects of greenhouse gas emissions, one analysis of heavy-duty vehicles, and then part of the analysis was on cap and trade. And what the headline was, and I'll complicate it in a minute, is that comparing 2017 to 2012 emissions, it found that the greatest beneficiaries of cap and trade reductions were DACs, that is, disadvantaged communities. So let's dig in just a little bit deeper. Next slide. Couple strengths of that study. The data is thoroughly cleaned and correct, and I'll come back to that later. And the OEHA team was collegial enough to harmonize their data with us, meaning that we found some mistakes, they found some mistakes, but the teams worked together so that we were looking at the same data so that any differences in result would wind up being mostly a result of methodology rather than looking at different data or different designations of, for example, whether a facility was cap and trade. OEHA was using an error model rather than proximity analysis. That is a plus because knowing where the error drifts is better than just drawing a buffer. One problem with the OEHA study, which had a rationale, they looked at just 2012 and 2017 because those were the years in which there was a lot of data quality checking to harmonize with national emissions inventories. And so there's a quality rationale for that. But the challenge with that is that 2012, if you look at emissions, looks like there was a surge. Part of it might be the economy coming back. Part of it might be companies trying to bump up their pollution before they have to hit a base for a cap. But in any case, 2012 was quite a surge over 2011. 2017, so it might be higher of a base than you would think if you'd average 2 years. 2017 is the end of a trading period. And so that's also a period in which folks might be cleaning up by meeting emissions targets rather than purchasing allowances because no allowances are left. So could be a problem. It's not clear. Next slide. Probably the bigger issue to realize is the following. You could get an absolute improvement in DAGs, even if the percentage improvement is less and the disparity grows. To look at that, this is a motivational example. Consider a DAC community versus a non-DAC community that in the pre-policy period is twice as polluted. When the policy is implemented, it sees a reduction, as does the non-DAC community. If you look at the amount that they change, the amount in the DAC is larger of a reduction than the reduction in the non-DAC, but that's because the percent change is coming off a bigger base. So if you look at the percent change, there was a 10% change in the DAC, a bigger percent reduction in the non-DAC. And so there's a bigger percentage, less of a percentage improvement in the disadvantaged community, but because it was more polluted to begin with, you get a larger number. But in fact, the disparity between the two grew. That's just a hypothetical. Let's see whether or not that shows up in the OEHA study. Next slide. In the OEHA study, looking at total greenhouse gas emissions for various quartiles of the CalEnviro screen, what you'll notice with the red numbers is a bigger number reduction in the most polluted areas by Cal EnviroScreen, less of a number reduction in the sort of second 25%. But you could see that there was a bigger percentage reduction in the less polluted areas than in the more polluted areas. So what you could see is that it really depends on whether or not you're looking at the absolute levels or percentage changes. And that explains a lot of difference between there's a bunch of other methodological nerdy things I'm not going to go into, but that explains a lot of the change and the way a team was aware of that and talked about it between that study and our study that came out the same year. In fact, I think 2 days before. Next slide. So we did a refresh in which we looked at average emissions from 2011 to 2012, compare them to 2016 to 2017 to deal with the endpoint issues I was mentioning about a surge in 2012, maybe a excess reduction in 2017. We broke facilities and neighborhoods into least improved at the smallest percent reduction, and in those least improved, the median facility actually saw an increase, by the way. Most improved saw actual reductions, and they saw the biggest reductions in a middle group. We used a proximity analysis, whether or not we were taking block groups, which are a census category, and doing distance metrics between them and sources. We worked carefully with OEHA on cleaning up the pollution mapping tool, particularly which facilities were cap and trade and not, an issue that I'll come back to in a minute. Next slide. So what we found was that there were, on average, when you look at the 11-12 to 16-17, reductions of GHGs and co-pollutants, but that those reductions were less so in DACs. If you go to the right set of bars, this is looking at places that were not near a facility, places that were the most improved, the middle group, and the least improved. And you could see as you move from no facilities to most improved to middle group to least improved, that the CS or Cal EnviroScreen score rises, suggesting less improvements in the most polluted, least advantaged places. Next slide. The pattern, however, was not always consistent, particularly looking at facilities, or statistically significant. Actually, somewhat consistent. If you look at the second to the last column, saying DAC there means those were the places with the least improvements. But if you look at the column next to it, having some asterisks means that it's significant, and a lot of those are not that significant. The pound sign means barely significant, and blank means not significant at all. Moving to the facility, to the next slide, neighborhood view. A little bit more significance across the different emissions, GHGs, particulate matter, NOx, and SOx, but it's not sort of overwhelming in the way that it felt with the earlier study. Next slide. So the bottom line from that study, while the evidence was not always consistent, there were valid reasons to be concerned, not so much about absolute hotspots, although there were some of those, but more about optimal reductions and foregone air quality benefits, which is what Dr. Catherine was raising before. And again, it's very key to see whether or not what you're focusing on is absolute reductions. If you're more polluted to begin with, a smaller reduction might give you a bigger reduction number, but it might be not the same percentage reduction, and disparities might still persist or even grow. And we suggested there were reasons to consider safeguards like facility caps or no trading zones, which Rachel will talk about later. Next slide. Another approach that came out at the same time, working paper was circulating, it's now published, was a paper by colleagues now at Arizona State University, Danae Hernandez Cortez, still at UC Santa Barbara, Kyle Meng, Do Environmental Markets Cause Environmental Justice? Next slide. They do two steps in their analysis. One is that they estimate the impact of cap and trade on pollution. They're controlling for the facility and for the year. In non-technical terms, if I can, facility means basically kind of what was that plant like, its technology, etc. And the year helps with whether or not the economy was growing, so we might expect emissions to rise. So what they're really looking at is the effect of cap and trade, first in the pre-policy period, then in the post-policy period, and asking, was there a bend in the trend, and was there an absolute improvement from cap and trade? They take the results from those estimates and they plug them into an error model. So important to remember that what they're plugging into the error model is the estimated changes, not the actual changes. So the estimates come from their first regression, which there is put in as 1. Next slide. Error modeling is a major plus. What they do is they compare cap and trade to non-cap and trade that are reporting to the pollution mapping tool. That's a good thing to do. Not all of their facilities are correctly located, something we won't spend any time on, but oil and gas that report to cap and trade, the location they have is the reporter location, but their actual satellite emissions occur in multiple locations. But there's a couple of other points that we'll get to. First, to try to get to a pure cap and trade effect, Hernandez Cortez Meng say that what they need to do is to look at facilities that weren't affected by other things like low carbon standards, and also to put to one side larger facilities because it makes it a little bit harder to estimate. Next slide. So what does that do to the sample? This shows you total covered GHGs by industry sector between 2011 and 2017. If you apply the restrictions they impose, what are you looking at? Next slide. Virtually none of the emissions. It's about 5% of the GHGs, about 8 to 12% of the other co-pollutants. So their estimates are in a particularly limited sample, their justification being that it's a pure estimate. Next slide. The important thing to realize is that the regression approach generates a common percentage effect from cap and trade. And while this is a bit of an extreme example, it helps to illustrate what's going on. If you look at the first table, moving from pre-policy to post-policy, for the DAC, pollution went up. For the non-DAC, pollution went down. It went up by 5% in the DAC. It went down by 30% in the non-DAC. Averaging those two, you get the average effect of cap and trade on all facilities. That's negative 12.5%. What they do is they basically plug that in and then put that into their error model. So what they're putting into their error model is what's circled in blue, which is a estimated reduction of 12.5% in the DAC and 12.5% in the non-DAC. The disparity ratios are going to stay the same. And this is acknowledged in a footnote. But because the DAC began with a higher level of pollution, there'll be a larger absolute change and a bigger reduction in the amount. But that's from an estimated change. So the real question is, is using an average a good thing? Next slide. What this compares here is the average percent change for the cap and trade facilities to what actually happened. The average are the black dots, giving everybody the same reduction. The blue is what actually happened. Not surprising, there's quite a bit of variance. Why is that not surprising? Because the whole point of cap and trade is to have variance. If you want to wring efficiency out, you've got to assume that some people will pollute more, some people will pollute less. That's how you get a market. In fact, you would expect variance to be there, maybe even increase. And about a third of the cap and trade facilities in their sample show an actual increase in GHG emissions. Next issue is one that's pretty crucial, that for any findings, what is crucial is tagging. Somehow this disappeared. What's the control group, the group of facilities that didn't enter into cap and trade, and the treatment group, the ones that did. And we have a new article that just posted. And what we look at is how they identified facilities and how that impacted the estimates. Complex, but necessary. What they did was they took the earliest version of the pollution mapping tool that was available that covered 2008 to 2015, and then they added 2016 data to it, and then they added 2017 data to it. Next slide. Why would that be a problem? The first version of the pollution mapping tool had a lot of data problems with it, which you expect with any first data release. Subsequent versions updated backwards. That is, they went back and corrected emissions and cap and trade designations. What HCM did was they found that cap and trade with the new data they added didn't match the old data, so they switched it back to the old status instead of using the new. That could be a problem. We'll see how much of a big problem. That was not such a problem in our report because we used the newest data set, and because even that data set had problems, but we worked the WIHA to correct the issues. In the most recent version of the pollution mapping tool, there's more detail on facilities and what status they occupied. And so we redesignate a facility as cap and trade if it spent the majority of post-policy years for the period they examined, 2013 to 2017, under cap and trade. Let's see what difference that makes. Next slide. The blue bars are the results from HCM's basic regression model. You could see they estimated gigantic increases, 9% a year in greenhouse gas emissions. Pretty startling because the cap was a 3% reduction a year, and big decreases as well in PM 2.5, PM 10, and NOx. So what we do is correct using the same estimation strategy for whether they were under cap and trade, using the criteria I mentioned. Did they spend the majority of years in the time regulated using the newest available data rather than appending new data and switching cap and trade to old designations? What happens? Next slide. As you can see with the pink bars, there's a much different set of estimates. They're much smaller. They're much closer to what we might have expected. For example, the GHG reduction is 3% a year, which is what the cap was. And if you remember what I said about the asterisks, having a lot of asterisks means it's a significant finding. You could see that the HCM findings, based on using those other cap and trade designations, were large and significant, but the findings using the corrected cap and trade designations are much smaller and are not statistically significant. suggesting that plugging them into an air model might not be quite as reliable. Next slide. There's new work by Glenn Sheriff. I'm going to go over this very fast. This work uses the risk screening environmental indicators. This is also a regression approach, but it's done better because what Sheriff does is interact status. And by the way, he's using the most recent status with % people of color. Next slide. One problem with this is that he's only able to connect about a third of the cap and trade facilities versus the OEHA and our team studies, which looked at all of them. But the interaction with people of color is a good strategy. Next slide. And his analysis suggests the cap and trade did not lead to increases in the longer period that he studies for minority communities, people of color communities. It suggests that there might be percentage improvement that was higher in those communities. While there may remain questions about this study, it's a broader set of facilities, not complete. Toxicity is taken into account, and the methods, while complex, I don't recommend reading it for fun, are definitively credible. Now, Rachel will take us home.
No, actually, you keep going.
Oh, so very quickly, we've also looked at the spending from the greenhouse gas reduction facilities. This is work with greenlining. Next slide. Bottom line, the dollars are indeed flowing generally to the most disadvantaged communities. Next slide. It actually seems also to be the case in terms of looking at race, in part because of the strong correlation between Cal and virus screen and race. Next slide.
Listo.
Yep. But where there is a challenge is there's problems like dairy digesters that people have brought up. Felt impact is strongest when projects are community driven and well coordinated. And our big call in this report is for deeper collaboration and more power building for the community groups. Now, Rachel.
Thanks, Lin. Go to the next slide. Okay, so back to the cap and trade issue. As a follow-up to our climate gap report, we published in 2010 a report called Minding the Climate Gap, where we made 4 kind of regulatory and policy recommendations. One was, if we really want to address equity, consider facility level caps, consider also no trading zones, surcharges to change price points and sort of incentivize deeper reductions rather than buying your way out of your emissions issue, and the creation of a community benefits fund that could be used to address issues in environmental justice community. And as we all know, the community benefits idea is now a reality as a result of SB 535 and is administered by the Strategic Growth Council. And that assessment that Manuel just talked about was basically looking at the extent to which these investments in the community benefits fund, what are the equity implications? Next slide, please. So one of the issues I think is thinking about how we can have a facility-specific or a source-specific approach to regulation of greenhouse gases with implications for emissions of co-pollutants, particularly in those facilities that are disproportionately located in communities of color and poor communities. And so there's been some reports that, and this report in particular, that has tried to think through this issue. And again, showing that reductions in air pollution can occur more rapidly in disadvantaged communities than on average for the state, as particularly if you're measuring that in terms of emissions. And this happens in absolute terms, but again, as emphasized in prior studies that Manuel had discussed, if we look at percentage terms and relative inequities, the rate of improvement in disadvantaged communities is less impressive. And again, because the starting point is that disadvantaged communities of color, often start from a worse air quality baseline, and they remain, relatively speaking, to their more privileged counterparts, more overburdened compared to other communities. Next slide, please. And so if we, Bertrand Roy, think about what would happen if there had been facility-specific caps to ensure that reductions are on par with an overall mandate, and that facilities, doing a facility or source emission specific approach may be an important policy lever to really lock in and maybe accelerate those benefits for disadvantaged communities. Again, SB 535 directs that a portion of the revenues be invested in disadvantaged communities, and air quality improvements are another major benefit of this program. So facility-specific caps can potentially reinforce the credibility of the program by distributing air quality benefits to key stakeholders, and without necessarily a lot of the arguments, without disrupting the market specifically. And next slide, please. So there's been interest among some economists, including Hernandez Cortes and Mang, by thinking through what are the implications of facility caps or no trade zones. I think one important sort of consequence of such a strategy is that there could be impacts on revenues, since these funding and purchases of these allowances are important for a greenhouse gas reduction fund. It can also, there would be some issues and details to work out in terms of the complexities and administration of such a additional policy lever related to caps and no trade zones. The last slide, next slide, please. Okay, so I want to leave you with a parting thought, which is, if we really want to accelerate and address equity as we address greenhouse gas emissions and make progress on our greenhouse gas reduction goals, we need to do more anticipatory projections that really look very specifically at the racial equity implications of the policies that we seek. I understand that in terms of investments of the Community Benefits Fund, we are legally prohibited from considering race. That I understand. But we are not precluded from evaluating the racial and ethnic disparities related to the air quality benefits of policies. Lots of civil rights laws require us to assess racial disparities in different programs, and air quality is no exception. And so we can do more sort of scenario building in terms of assessing the racial disparity implications of our policies. And what I'm showing you here now is an example of a scenario that we did looking at. This was a national example looking at the implications if we were to reduce PM 2.5 in the next 20 years. And these panels are showing you, and we did this in anticipation of the Biden administration's Justice 40 program. And so the black bar is like business as usual projections based on what we're seeing in terms of current trends in PM 2.5 reductions. And then the different bars look at, if we focus on doubling the emissions in Justice 40 communities, the green bar is doubling emissions in communities where there's a majority of communities of color. And then the blue bar is in communities where the PM 2.5 levels are the highest, and then the yellow bars where you have the highest, very high proportion of low-income residents. And then what are the equity implications? So I want to draw your attention to the panel that says people of color. And if we use a targeted approach where we're really trying to reduce emissions in places that have an overwhelming majority of people of color that host these facilities, you achieve the greatest overall benefits as shown by the green bar for communities of color, but also for all other groups, okay? If we just focus on kind of regular business as usual overall reductions for everybody, you do not achieve as good as overall results for PM 2.5 levels, and you definitely are not achieving those reductions in the inequity gap in PM 2.5 based on race. So I just want to leave you with that I want us to ensure that we don't lose sight of the racial disparities related to cap and trade, and that we do have some wiggle room to sort of do more anticipatory science to look at the racial equity implications of the policy tools that we use going forward in terms of implementation of the cap and trade program. And next slide, I think that's it, just to say thank you.
Thank you both so much again for that review and those insights. There have obviously been a lot of studies and ongoing debate about the impacts of the cap and trade program, and it's something that we understand has significance for EJ communities in California, but also globally, because there are so many other places looking at this program and considering replicating it. So now is the time for EJAC members to raise their hands if they have comments or questions that they would like to share with Drs. Pastor and Morello-Frosch. Just a quick reminder that we did have Dallas Bertrand and Nick Roy present to us their findings on facility level caps in the fall. And so appreciate being able to revisit that conversation, because I do think it's significant that a kind of traditional economic analysis showed it wouldn't have an adverse impact on the cap and trade program, and yet we still see resistance from the Air Resources Board. I have one quick clarifying question, and then I'm going to pass it to you, Kevin. And again, encourage other folks to raise their hand. So you mentioned in your set of recommendations from, I think it was called Mind the Gap, facility level caps and no trade zones. I'm often hearing people use those terms as if they're interchangeable, but as a geographer, spatially, to me, those mean two different things. Can you all help clarify and unpack what is the difference between a facility level cap and a no trade zone?
Quickly, the facility level cap might choose, for example, the most polluting facilities. A no trading zone might be more of a cumulative impact approach, taking a look at whether or not a neighborhood has a lot of facilities, and therefore each facility there, even if it's not the biggest contributor, should not be allowed to purchase allowances and not engage in reduction. So one is more about drawing a geography and saying that there are externalities and that these emitters should, given that they're clustered with other emitters, act in a special way versus, for example, targeting the largest refineries or you name the particular facility. So they are related, Catherine, but that's why they are, Dr. Catherine, but that's why they are different.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. So just wanted to underscore there are differences there, and part of why it's important to have these deeper dive conversations is because in theory we could have a combination of those two things, right? But we have to talk more about what real implementation would look like to figure out how we could specifically integrate this into the cap and trade program. So thank you for that. Kevin, and then I see Jill, go ahead.
Yes, it's great to see both of you. And I appreciate all the work that you've done over the years and work that we've done together. It's been a remarkable ride. I really appreciated the evaluation of the studies by the various groups. And Manuel, I think you need to write a book called The Dangers of Seeking Statistical Significance. Because that's really what is happening here, right? I mean, you illustrated it so eloquently, and it's terrifying, I think, to most policymakers and many folks that have various agendas, is we have completely overridden numbers with percentages. And those percentages can, as you demonstrated, reflect large changes in certain spaces and on certain groups. But the numbers are not considered. And so, as you pointed out, if I've got a big effect on a small number, I can tell everybody that I achieved a 70% decrease in utilization of something, or in the amount of disease that's in there caused by something. And yet when I look at the numbers, I find, I've got very tiny numbers compared to how many people out there in that population actually exist. And I see that used time and time again, for good and bad. I think people use it on both sides of many, many arguments in this country, and this is just another one. And I think we've really got to come back around to including the numbers with these percentages, so that we can really get a sense. And then where they are matters as well. Are these numbers distributed across 1,000 miles, or are they concentrated in a 10-mile circle? That also has impact. And I don't think any of those studies really illustrated that all that well. And I was a little disappointed in OEHA there, after, who's one of my favorite organizations, but you make me doubt now what I'm seeing sometimes. Catherine, I thought what you said was really right on as a comment, and so I was going to bring that up, but I don't have to now. And the idea, again, because we're really talking about this no trade zone issue, and I think it's really important that we understand this facility approach, while it could be built in, doesn't really address the idea that a large number of small facilities emitting could have a much larger impact than a single facility that has high emissions. So we can't really look at that just as facility limitations there. Would you agree with that? Either one of you?
I'll say one thing about it, and then please, Rachel. I think that's a really important point. In fact, in our analysis of the Hernandez-Cortez-Meng study, one way they try to get around the common percentage assumption they're making is to let the effect be larger for larger facilities. But it turns out the correlation for EJ communities, people of color communities, is not size of facility, but number of facilities. So that there's a cluster in communities of color. And so that is something that I think is really important to take into account. Rachel?
Quick follow up on that. Would you agree that distribution centers and warehouses would meet that standard? They are all small facilities relatively, but they're proliferating like, I don't know, just like weeds out there in the landscape, in our communities.
They're getting bigger too. But also, you're right. I mean, the major advance EJ proponents and researchers made together 20 years ago was to lift up the importance of cumulative impacts. And so we simply cannot lose sight of the fact of this clustering of activities and the way in which that yields problems. Rachel?
Yeah, and I think sometimes the underlying assumption that if you reduce emissions for everybody at the same rate, that's a good thing for everybody. While, in absolute terms, air quality is getting better, it's getting a lot better for some groups compared to others, and that gap persists, and you can actually create a scenario where, relatively speaking, the inequity actually gets worse. which is what we were trying to show with this PM 2.5 scenarios, which is why these notions of no trade zones and things like that take into account that, you know, we need to focus where the impacts are the worst, and you know, where and acknowledge that if we're really going to address the environmental justice goals of you know, eliminating racial disparities in air quality, we need to take race into account when we're doing these assessments.
And one last question, forgive me, Jill, on the issue of PM 2.5, it seems to me almost ridiculous that we're citing co-benefits from these climate investments when I look at areas like the San Joaquin Valley, where the PM 2.5 health standards have never been met for either annual or 24 hours, starting with 1997. So yet all this money has been invested. So if it's coming down along with the climate stuff, we're just not seeing that. I mean, it just seems like they're actually completely disconnected. Maybe that's overstating, but any thoughts?
I mean, again, I think assessments of investments could also take into account issues like where air quality or other indicators of environmental quality are worse. That's another way to approach an equity assessment of the investments and the impact, the extent to which they have impacted or improved or not those regional air quality conditions.
You want to add to that? Rachel's point is very important. And we had challenges when we were assessing greenhouse gas reduction funds. We, like the state, paid attention mostly to what the investments were in terms of housing, transport, other opportunities. But there's not a lot of attention to whether or not there's localized air quality improvements. And it would seem like that should be built in.
We agree. Thank you. Thank you both. Great presentation.
Thanks, Kevin. Jill, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I apologize for not being on screen, but I do have issues. I think I've been off 3 times so far, but my question is about EnviroScreen. I personally haven't found that tool to be very useful or very realistic. So I'm wondering why you used EnviroScreen, and then additionally, and maybe this doesn't make any sense either, but I'm assuming, and maybe that's the wrong thing to do, that just, you know, anecdotally, I myself have noticed a change in wind patterns. So I'm wondering, like, how those kind of ancillary things impact, like, what you've shown. It was a great presentation. I really appreciate it.
So first, we in our work use Cal EnviroScreen. We also use percent people of color, poverty, linguistic isolation, educational markers, as well. We use Cal EnviroScreen because it's a standard measure that other people are using as well. And we think that there's some challenges and gaps in it. For example, it doesn't actually really have climate built into it. But it is a standard metric that others have used. I think people are aware that we had developed a precursor to it called the Environmental Justice Screening Method, which we have since updated for LA County, which has a lot more on proximity and climate metrics. Obviously, like any parent, we like our child better than your child. But do we understand that Cal EnviroScreen is also being used for policy, and it's a standard that people talk about? But that's a good point. Rachel, do you want to address that or the other question?
Yeah, I mean, I think in addition to what Manuel said, we because Cal Enviro Screen is still used as a decision-making tool, I think it's important when we do assessments to look at it. But totally agree, and in all of our work, we seek to supplement it with other key indicators that are not embedded in Cal Enviro Screen. And we did a project a while back for ARB and DTSC to come up with recommendations on what additional indicators probably should be looked at in addition to Cal Enviro Screen to reflect some of the other so-called vulnerability as well as environmental hazard indicators that are not currently included as indicators in Cal Enviro Screen. And, you know, we can get you a link to that report, which is posted online on CARB's website if you don't have access to it. And finally, in terms of wind patterns, that's a very important issue. I totally agree with you. We're currently working on a project to look at the potential health benefits of fuel switching in refineries, like from to biofuels or retirements of refineries. And in our modeling estimates of air quality implications and then looking at health impacts, we are trying to take into account wind patterns over time, in addition to also accounting for the sort of interference of major wildfire events that can potentially make it difficult to tease out the health benefits of refinery, the health implications, not always benefits, of fuel switching and or refinery retirements.
Rachel, I want to just add that our team in recent years has expanded and includes Madison Swain from San Diego State and Mijan Cha from UC Santa Cruz, each bringing different quantitative and qualitative metrics. And you might say a word or two about some of your postdocs, Rachel, you've been collaborating with, because I know that for better or worse, when people think about who's doing work in this space, they think about you and me and a few others. But boy, there's a generation of scholars coming up who are doing first quality stuff.
Yeah, we've had the privilege of collaborating with in addition to the aforementioned folks. A lot of great work also with Michael Mendez at UC Irvine, Dr. David Gonzalez, who's a newly minted professor at UC Berkeley, with whom we've done a lot of work on the oil and gas industry, and Dr. Joan Casey, who's also been trying to track the health benefits, both in terms of respiratory health and other outcomes of climate change policies and changes in emission sources and overall emissions. And she's at University of Washington.
Thank you both for that. Matt, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to try to do this on camera. Just wanted to thank both the presenters for taking us into the third and fourth dimension by proving that, you know, geography and the proximity studies were inadequate. And the cumulative benefits are also, you know, vital to be looked at. I'm sure you both know the state has an obligation to look at the history of inequality when evaluating any of its policies or procedures. And I think that this study adds to the literature proving that that's not being done, right? That we're still running data science and public health fool's errands that seem to have to be convinced that it's hard at being a marginalized community in a white supremacist society, and it's harder to get through climate change without money. So these are all things the state already knows. What I'm worried about, though, is in showing that there are these inadequate pollution benefits in low-income communities of color, how are we also not arguing for like increasing in the cap in this cap and trade scheme? And how do we as an advisory committee ensure that going forward the state starts to comply with law around civil rights and historic inequality, and that we are also not summoning new support for cutting this deal forever and increasing the perpetuation of pay to play in the fossil fuel industry. So, so I guess I do have a question since Manny and Dr. Morales know more than I do. You recounted your history working with the state. At what point do you think the state categorically knew that pollution burdens and climate burdens intersected with race and poverty? And I kind of want to know when they knew, and just for my own benefit of cataloging their divergence from compliance with civil rights law. I think you show that in your earlier studies that race is a defining factor in pollution exposure in California. How long have we known this and it's still not being put into policy in practice in the state of California?
Well, the first piece of California state legislation, which I think was by Hilda Solis, mandating OPR to look into EJ issues, was in 1999. And it did come on a wave of studies to which Rachel, Jem, John Hipp, who's now UC Irvine, and I contributed. I think that there was initially, both in the field and in the state, reluctance to think about race as the factor. That is, there was a sense that if there was disproportionality, it was largely just a function of income and property values and toxic sources going where land was cheapest, and compensation to communities would be lowest. But from our earliest studies, we found, I don't know whether it was necessarily to our surprise, but it's been since demonstrated over and over again in multiple studies that race is a more important predictor than income in terms of disparities, having to do with histories of redlining and exclusion, and of course, continuing structural racism and disempowerment of communities in citing processes. So I think it's been a while for the state to come to that realization, but I don't think, it's been a while. It's been a journey for the field to come to that realization as well. And to stop thinking it's just income, and that must be what we need to explain, and understand that race plays a role as well. And just to step back a minute, what we were really hoping to do today is there's a lot of noise around cap and trade, different studies. What gets highlighted is the conclusion and not how they came to it, and whether or not the conclusion they came to is one that you could have faith in. So that's what we were trying to help with. Rachel?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, Manuel, you covered it great. I don't have anything to add.
The
Were
only,
you done, Matt?
the only thing I would add
Go ahead,
is
Dr.
to go back to the slide that, not show it, but go back to the slide that Rachel lifted up about our study in 2010, which warned about some of these problems with cap and trade, was not ideologically one way or the other, but proposed a set of not too difficult remedies that would have made things better.
Yeah, thanks. I know I could count on you for that, Manny, and thank you, Rachel, for letting me answer that. I just think it begs the question that as an advisory committee, we kind of have an obligation to track how long we're going to continue to quibble over details within policies that still are clearly not intentionally addressing historic inequality. And so, if this is now a permanent committee, I'd hate for an EJEC member to be sitting here in 5 years going, golly, none of these policies seem to be targeting race directly. And the state has an obligation to do that. Well, of course, it matters when you know things just as much as what you know. So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Matt. Just FYI, your sound is a little bit challenging. I think I could catch maybe like 90% of what you said, but it was kind of going in and out. Just as an FYI.
Apologies. We should have done it off camera.
That's okay. I think we caught most of it. So I do want to again put out a call for EJAC members who have comments or questions. We do have still a few minutes left on this item. And in the meantime, I do have 2 follow-up questions and a thought. So in the vein of what Kevin Hamilton and others were speaking to earlier, there's obviously limitations in making generalizations and using statistical analysis. And there's limitations to the data that's available. The San Joaquin Valley is a pretty unique region, and California is a giant state. Local neighborhoods in the San Joaquin Valley, if we're ground truthing the data, can have different lived realities. So if you use CARB's pollution mapping tool in South Stockton over the last few years, greenhouse gas emissions and criteria air pollutants both have actually gone up. We then also have small rural communities like Kettleman City who often are diluted because they're in a block group where they're caught up with other communities that are more affluent than they are. So naming that, statistics and generalizations don't really tell the lived reality of those experiences. I'm wondering if you could both speak to research that does ground truthing and integrates qualitative data, uses case studies. Is there anybody in California that's doing that you all would highlight?
Yes. I think our team and some of the new collaborators or newish collaborators that we have, we try to, it's really important to not just do big data projects. Those are very important. And statistical analysis is very important. And, we're numbers geeks and we can't help ourselves. But it is also extremely important to put faces on the numbers and the statistics that we do, so that it puts a very important context in those numbers and those results that we derive from our studies, and helps us understand more and tell the stories behind some of the statistical results that we see and help us understand maybe what's going on. Because we can show relationships and associations, which are predictors, which are not. But more ground truthing efforts to also show what big data sets are missing. What are some emission sources that are not getting picked up, either due to regulatory requirements that don't include those types of emission sources in local communities, as well as just benefiting from community knowledge and wisdom about what's going on in the ground that large data sets could never capture. And certainly scientists who are not living in those communities will never know or understand without doing that ground truthing work, interviews and qualitative work. So our collaborators, including Dr. Cha at UCSF, Dr. Mendez at UC Irvine, and others with whom we work, and as well as others are really good at doing that work and have dedicated themselves to and are great experts in doing that work.
Well said. Another name I'd add is Juan de Lara, who is doing a very deep kind of social and environmental justice history of Coachella Valley. He's at USC, heads our Center for Latinx and Latin American Studies.
Thank you for that. So also revisiting the list of recommendations that you all spoke to earlier and recognizing, we're a committee that's interested in trying to find solutions to challenging problems. Can you clarify and expand upon the recommendation of implementing surcharges that would change price points?
I'll do that. The idea, and there are some objections to this, is that it's essentially pricing co-benefits in. So if you know that reduction in a neighborhood that's already overexposed, or one where the facility has particularly tight correlation between GHG emissions and co-pollutants, that reductions there would get you more credits, and essentially be valued higher than reductions in neighborhoods where there isn't a lot of cumulative exposure. Economists don't like that because it introduces more complexity into the pricing mechanism in ways that facility caps do not. Economists generally don't like no trading zones because why should a firm's costs be dependent on the firms around it? But on the other hand, that's important to communities, and firms benefit by clustering, so they're already realizing benefits. So that's the idea of surcharges to change the effective price that firms would face in doing reductions.
Anything you want to add, Dr. Morello-Frosch?
No, I think that was pretty cogent. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I do want to put a last call out for EJAC members with comments and questions. Please do raise your hand and get in the queue. Also, just to again remind us that we have had an active originally cap and trade work group and now carbon markets work group that includes the low carbon fuel standard that has been engaged in the ongoing process and has submitted numerous comment letters and has been engaged with staff. It's become pretty clear over the last few months that the Air Resources Board is not considering making any equity-based changes, including facility level caps or no trade zones in their current program update that they're looking to adopt this fall, which then is going to require us to go to the legislature to give them direction to make these changes. So any final comments or questions from EJAC members? If not, I want to go ahead and pass it back to you, Dr. Pastor and Dr. Morello-Frosch, if you all have any parting words that you'd like to share with us. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Well, first, thank you so much for allowing us to share this work with you and for this robust and important discussion. In terms of my parting thoughts, you know, in order, I think consistently what we see is that in order for policy to be not just beneficial for so-called disadvantaged communities and or communities of color, but centering equity in any kind of policy actually makes the policy better for everybody. When we're protecting the most impacted, we're better protecting everybody. And I think that shows statistically, it shows qualitatively, and the evidence is really strong. And I think we have hopefully imparted some ideas about tools that could be implemented to forge that path going forward. Pass it on to Manuel.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. It was very useful to be able to try to synthesize and figure out, like that Albert Einstein slide we used, how to take very complicated material and present it in a way that we could all understand and in a way demystify. I think one of the central things, Rachel just said it all on a substantive side. The one thing I would add is that the case studies, as Dr. Catherine pointed out, are important. The community specificities are important. But one thing we've realized from doing his work is getting the data right is pretty important too. So doing a large data study, it's good to use the correct data.
Absolutely, and definitely an important takeaway from your presentations as well. So before we move on to the next item, I'm going to pass it to Ashley with CARB.
Thanks, Dr. Catherine. I really appreciate it. Just wanted to say thank you to our speakers and to the EJAC members, and also just to mention that we will be taking the feedback to our respective teams here internally. So thank you for taking the time to provide that feedback and your questions. And that was it for now. I just wanted to make sure that you all know we're listening, and we will make sure to share with our respective teams for those who were not able to join us today.
So thank you again to our panelists. Of course, you're welcome to stay and hang out if you'd like to hear us discuss our carbon capture and direct air capture resolution, but we also understand you all are working on many other things, and we won't get to public comment until later on. And of course, you all aren't obligated to stay or respond to that. So again, really appreciate you all joining us. And with that, I think we'll close out the cap and trade discussion and move to the resolution. And
Thank
Martha
you.
Dina, I know you were a big part of developing this resolution. Did you want to kick us off?
Yes. Let me see if I can make it on camera. And I know that my audio is pretty bad and it's the best I can do. So, you know, we have been consistent. I went back through my old emails and we've been consistently delivering this unheard message to the Air Resources Board that carbon capture, storage and utilization and direct air capture are just not the approach that we think will get environmental justice for our communities. It will not help air quality. And I think the thing, and I was not going to do this, but I can't help myself, got no impulse control. The thing that we just learned from the report we just heard is we kind of told you this would happen, right? The environmental justice community told you this would happen. Now we continue to collect data and are seeing that the concerns that we had were real. And I just would hope that this research is actually heard and accepted, and that it also tells you that what we're telling you around carbon capture, utilization, direct air capture, and many of these other technologies is also true. That we're deeply concerned that the solution to climate change cannot be to continue to push the burdens onto communities of color and those impacted by air pollution. And that if we just focus on carbon, we make a mistake. And that carbon, you know, CARB has an opportunity to move us away from policies that continue to commodify carbon, because once you make it a commodity, you make it almost assured that we're not going to actually reduce it because somebody is making a lot of profit from it. And so we need to move away from solutions that monetize carbon in these ways. And so our resolution is, again, one more effort to, along with the letters that we've sent, the letters that have been supported by many in the environmental justice movement. It is, you know, the international position of the environmental justice community internationally is very concerned with these technologies. And increasingly, we are hearing that these technologies aren't delivering. And so this is crowding real solutions. And we also are aware that, you know, communities, we're used to this. And so we're like, oh, they're going to do it anyway, even though we're telling them it's going to harm our communities. Can we have some guardrails? And even those promises are incredibly hollow. And so it's very important for CARB, the board, to use its power to support the environmental justice community and actually find real solutions. So with that, proselytizing, if we can show the resolution, I think all of you have had a chance to look at it. We're still adding elements to it. I think we heard some feedback from the latest report from PS Energy. And I'm going to ask Matt to share some of those concerns. I read that and I was really worried. I happened to be at a green chemistry conference, and chemistry matters, right? And some of the impacts seem to be incredibly dangerous. So I don't know if we want to add something, because these seem to be more unintended consequences that we're learning about the technology. And I'll stop there and open it up to other EJAC members.
Thanks, Martha Dina. I was just going to add quickly in terms of context, the CCUS DAC work group did meet last week and reviewed the resolution. We provided feedback using track changes, but it looks like maybe all of the changes were accepted in this version, but it has been circulated and posted. I would say one of the biggest changes is explicitly adding direct air capture, which was not included before. Since then, I've also gotten feedback that it would be helpful to just add a general definition of carbon dioxide removal, CCUS and DAC, and differentiate between mitigation strategies versus those that address legacy emissions. So unless there's opposition to that, I'm going to take it back to the work group. We'll add in that piece and we will review it again. So just to be clear, process-wise, we're very open to discussion and feedback today and modification. It's not agendized to vote on it and adopt it. So it's a discussion for today. So with that bit of background, definitely looking for feedback, comments, and questions from the group.
Matt, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I thank you, Marcelina, for the nod on that. The good people, physicians, scientists, engineers for healthy energy, they do first rate research. And they have a recent publication that Marcelina shared in our last meeting around the green, even like the most Pollyanna hydrogen solutions, the green hydrogen solution. And they found that across the board, these plans lack the life cycle analysis that we need to actually understand it. So when we're sitting here, and the green hydrogen component is relevant here to the CCUS discussion, obviously. It's one part of really many of these facilities that somehow California is going to help refineries of new versions and old versions sequester its carbon. Even when carbon knows itself, that carbon capture systems have no place on a refinery. They're just redundant and they don't reduce overall carbon. We knew that from our symposium in Stockton with the director of the Department of Energy's carbon capture division, and so everybody from they should remember.
Oh, you're breaking up
in our portfolio. Oh, sorry. It just that it still remains in our portfolio. So I mean, it's not just environmental justice communities that aren't being listened to. It's other agencies and other research entities that aren't being listened to. But we do know that, as is germane to this carbon capture resolution, that many of the facilities that will come online to take advantage of this are really at preliminary planning stages, but they seem to be making it through permitting, and we should be more careful when jumping to a new energy economy when it's something nobody's ever done before, especially considering what we just saw, which is that mid-level facilities they're actually growing, and we're getting more of those, and those are happening in historically disadvantaged communities. So I can share the link again. I encourage people to, if you need another example that we are making big strides in a direction we don't fully understand, happy to share that link. And that I do think I'm happy with the resolution as it currently stands. But I'll just say it once again, it's amazing the credulity that's given to an industry level promoter, and the incredulity that's heaped on communities that know intimately the burdens of living within fossil fuel and post-fossil fuel energy economy. It's just really distasteful to be a part of.
If there's no other comments, again, I want to make sure all members of the committee get a chance to see it, add their comments.
Yeah, I think it's looking good, Kevin. Since nobody's speaking, I didn't put my hand up, but I really feel like it's pretty close to done. I wonder if we could speak to this in reference to the reply from on 905 that we got from the director.
Kevin, just to make sure, was that a question for CARB?
No, I was thinking more, I thought we were going to talk about that and maybe it's just not come up yet, or was it on this item on the agenda? Or was that something we should have done when it was just mentioned earlier that had happened, that reply had been given early on? I'm really speaking to the chairs, co-chairs.
I think this is probably a relevant place to discuss it. And I also hear you saying at some point it would be nice, especially now that we have a technical writer, if we can, to respond to some of these memos in writing.
Yes. I thought, the reply, which bears, I think, directly on our ask here, which is we expect this ask to inform the process that CARB is mandated to do by 9:05. And I think that what got lost in that answer was, or maybe it was because the question was so specific around permitting versus, when is CARB going to start this regulatory process that it's been mandated to do? And when will EJAC get a chance to talk about that and be involved in that? And in what way would we be involved in that? This resolution that we are passing here would become one of the documents that is included in that. And the list of asks that we have here could be the beginning framework for that regulatory work that they're required to take. Or, again, because it was permitting directly, I think I didn't get an answer that I would like to have seen, which is, when are you going to start the regulatory process mandated by this bill to create this regulation on this particular source? So an activity. Does that make sense? I feel like I was a little all over the place there.
Made sense to me.
Okay, good. So the question on when that regulatory action will start is actually for CARB staff.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. Unfortunately, I cannot really provide any additional information, but I do want to make sure to let the folks know that this came up and take it back. Apologies, we just don't have the right folks on the call.
Yeah, I would have been surprised if you could have answered that question, or everybody would know because it would have been made publicly. But
exactly.
Yeah. But still, let's put it out there. I'd like to get an answer. This format was good, so I'd love to see an answer in writing from Dr. Cliff on that. So we all have an idea of, when it's coming up, and is CARB actually going to meet the deadline, put in 9:05 there in January 2025, or is there going to be a delay? I think it's important that the public know this as well as the EJAC.
Thanks, Kevin. I will take that back.
I see Luis's hand.
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Luis Olmedo with Comité Cívico. I have a bigger picture question, because while this is a concern being put into a resolution, CARB has a massive workforce, and other agencies that are collaborating, imagine public, private, academic, to come up with strategies, market strategies, or other types of strategies. And while this resolution is being put forward, how many other strategies are being crafted where there are environmental justice concerns? What is the policy that protects environmental justice other than the 20-plus-year-old policy that CARB still has in its books? What is the today policy that avoids the hard work of environmental justice, having to make a case and having to demonstrate data, research, make the expense, the human capital or financial capital to try to make a case? What is the policy that CARB has, which I believe would be the more feasible direction? Otherwise, if there isn't an updated policy, then what protections are there for environmental justice? I just don't see it feasible. That there's probably 100 other similar ideas getting cooked up. What's the direction that CARB internally is being given to say, hey, please make sure that you understand these vulnerabilities, these concerns, before you bring me ideas and strategies? So that's it. I just want to put it on the record and put it on the radar that it's not feasible to have to tackle each and every one after they've already cooked up ideas. So thank you.
Well, I think, one of the, I'm sorry, did someone have their hand up? I didn't see it. Go for it, Kevin. I think that was Kevin.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Louis, I hear what you're saying. I raised the issue about our policy, and the response was we created one 20+ years ago, and we don't need to go down that road again. And that struck me as odd in that in the Bay Area district, the Air District, we have spent the last 2 years with the consultant creating a policy, of which we work with every department in the Air District to create this policy. So it struck me as odd to come here and talk about policy and to hear that a document was created 20+ years ago and it's not necessary to discuss it anymore. I think we do need to have a policy, because if it's not work that's done within the Air District, then it's going to be a lot of this, us giving recommendations. Several years later, a report is going to be given that what we stated was actually correct. So I would love to work with you on finding ways to enhance this policy that we have in order for the work to get done on a daily basis.
Oh, wow. I don't know if there's any hands up, but I'm not sure which policy you're talking about, but I guess, the policy around carbon capture and sequestration is SB 905. But I do think that one of, and I think it's worked better in the building decarb space, where we've been able to talk about co-design so that, maybe, again, I don't know that it's going to stop carbon capture and sequestration, because there seems to be a commitment, no matter what the environmental justice community says, to follow this technology path. But we do need to do more work, like Luis said, sort of this decide, announce, and defend doesn't work for us, right? We want to actually be at the table earlier during a pre-scoping process and be able to have the conversations about the science, the data, what data gaps exist around new technologies, so that we don't end up always being at loggerheads, and that environmental justice isn't an afterthought. It's actually embedded in the ideas that are presented. So I don't know if we need more legislation or if we need policy. I believe we need a culture shift at CARB about how to approach the climate crisis. That's a more fundamental thing. Yeah, I'll stop there.
This is Dr. Catherine. I agree with what's been said, and I also want to underscore the point that CARB is a really large agency with a lot of staff and a lot of resources. So to come to environmental justice groups and say like, oh, well, we can't really worry about community protections until we get a certain budget ask, but we know we need to move fast so that projects can get credits through our system is beyond dissatisfying. If I waited at Central Valley Air Quality Coalition to get new staff before we confronted carbon capture, we would be way behind. Our communities had no choice. We were confronted with this technology being brought in and backed into a corner and had to respond to it. We didn't get to wait for a bunch of money or a bunch of staff. CARB is big. It has the resources. They can take this seriously and make the commitment to do what was called for in SB 905. So wanted to underscore that.
Are there any other comments or questions for this item, or do we want to move forward to our break?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure. So what we're doing with this is we're actually going to be working with the technical writer to flesh this out. That's this, so the further action on the resolution. And then kind of put in the bike rack this idea of, how do we as the permanent EJAC begin to make that culture shift, work with CARB staff to do that so that we're putting those EJ concerns up front in the DNA of their process versus trying to shoehorn it in and then saying, oh, sorry, we can't, right? It's just a little too hard. It doesn't fit. Justice doesn't fit here, right? And I think that that's where all of us has, risk speaking for all of us have been incredibly frustrated with that, a process that continues to marginalize and ignore the environmental justice community.
Thank you, Martha Dina. Also just want to echo what I heard process-wise, which is that it seems like there's a comfort level within the committee to put this on our August agenda as an item to adopt the resolution. So want to be explicit about that. And again, use that as a call to action for folks who haven't taken a close look at it to please do so in the next couple of weeks, because again, we want everybody's feedback and buy-in on everything that this says before we do actually adopt it at our next meeting.
I just put my hand up.
Oh, I can't see, sorry.
No worries. I just wanted to say, yeah, I support bringing that to the agenda for August for action. That's all. I didn't know if we needed to express our support or not. I know it's not a voting item, but.
Okay, so.
Go ahead, Karina.
Oh, is there any additional comments? I was just going to move to our break if not.
Nope, that's the same thing I was going to do. So you can go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we'll now be taking a short break. We'll be back in 15 minutes at 3:20 p.m. EJAC members, please be sure to be back before this time so we can have quorum. And then for those in the public who want to provide comments, please raise your hand in Zoom now so we can have a queue for when we're back from break. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. The time is 3:20 p.m. and we are at quorum, so we can finish up the rest of the meeting. EJAC members, please be sure to let us know if you are stepping out of the discussion in the chat and when you're back so we can maintain quorum for the duration of the meeting. So we're now going to open up the public comment period. We ask that everyone who is interested in speaking in Zoom raise their hands and we'll call on you accordingly. We will allow 3 minutes for each commenter at this time, and we'll let you know if we need to adjust based on the volume of comments. Please state your name and affiliation before you provide your question or your comment. So we have no in-person commenters, so we're going to move to Zoom. To begin, we have Cynthia Babick. Cynthia, your line has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Thank you. I'm Cynthia Babbage, and I'm founder and director of the Del Amo Action Committee, and I'm also the co-coordinator for the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network. First of all, I really want to thank the EJAC. It really resonated with me when Martha said, you know, you ensure communities are heard and our experiences are respected. I think that's really key. Many of us has been doing this for a really long time, and we know when we're getting the bum rush, we know when things are stalling out, and we know how to move forward. And so thank you all so much for taking your time and dedication to having the communities have a voice at this table. The second thing I'd like to say is I think it's very key for us to focus on cumulative impacts analysis. As we heard earlier from the presenters, I think that's going to be our best avenue at this time. We should continue to pursue others, but let's really start focusing in on making sure that the cumulative impact analysis that we were promised so long ago actually start happening. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was that CARB needs to have more progressive, productive and proactive engagement with fence-line communities. We need to have policy change, update, and creation. DAC is working with many agencies and many different avenues, focusing on some of the problems in our community. And many of the staff recognize the need for new policies to be created, and yet we hear pushback. We recognize the need for new policies to be created and are updated, and we see the pushback. So I just want to really encourage, and I know I really don't need to encourage you, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm right there with you as you continue to push to meet the needs of having these policy changes and updates. It's not going to change anything in our fence line communities without them. There is no power to create enforcement. Believe me, the people that I work with would have enforced and have to every extent possible. And so to me, that means they do not have the tools at their disposal. So part of what I believe a community's role is to uplift what we hear and what we learn from the agencies and what they need to truly protect our communities. Because as you've heard today with statistics and analysis, we remain unprotected. I love, love, love the idea of no trading zones. When will the agency understand enough is enough and too much has been enough for a very long time? So thank you all for taking the time, not only today, but all the hard work that I see you doing behind the scenes. Know that you're treasured and loved. And always, if there's anything that you think I might be able to do to help, some of you know how to reach me. But other than that, I am so appreciative. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Stephen Rosenblum. Stephen, your line has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Hi, my name is Stephen Rosenblum. I'm a member of Climate Action California, a group in California that's dedicated to reversing climate change. I'd like to thank you for your strong letter on carbon capture and storage. I think the EJ concerns are all correct, that whatever is done should not have adverse impacts on EJ communities. However, I think the resolution suffers from the fact that it lumps direct air capture in with smokestack capture, which to me are two significantly different issues. Presently, the atmosphere has 421 ppm of carbon dioxide, and 350 is recognized as the standard we need to get to avoid further climate change effects. And climate change is indirect effect on all the EJ communities, since they're most strongly affected by the floods and heat waves, and they have the least capacity to respond. I'd just like to point out that 1 ppm of carbon dioxide in the air corresponds to 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So it means that, if we removed 5 gigatons per year, it would take us 70 years to get rid of all that carbon dioxide. And we're not even at megatons yet. So we need to start working on this. And finally, I'd like to point out that all CCS is not the same. For instance, Brimstone Technology makes Portland cement from carbon-free calcium silicate, which actually sequesters 0.8 of a ton of carbon dioxide in concrete. Another company, Charm, makes combust agricultural waste in pyrolysis process. It converts 30% of the biomass into heat and the rest into a hydrocarbon, which is stored underground. So it's not a well, but it can be just stored as a liquid. So don't lump all direct air capture into the same bundle. And I really think that you need to put some more nuance into your letter on that particular issue. If you're interested, we have a white paper that we've written on the subject that goes into more detail on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Rita Loof. Rita, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs.
Rita, it looks like your audio cut off. Okay, I'll come back. So next we have Clayton Munnings. Clayton, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Hey, hi, EJAC. Thanks, Dr. Catherine, for facilitating and hosting that really comprehensive discussion. And I don't think Dr. Pastor or Dr. Morello-Frosch are still here, but I'll send my thanks to them in writing. So I wanted to just make a remark and then add maybe a few other equity-based solutions to the mix, not to take away from any of the ones that have already been mentioned. So just speaking to the first slide deck presentation. So I think one thing I wanted to just, elevate is that CARB implements several dozen climate policies. And then that's not even to speak about policies about this that the CEC or local air regulators make. And that's really consequential for both the correlational and causational studies that were discussed today. It makes doing both of them very hard. So drawing lessons from correlational studies and pulling off a causational study are both quite difficult, and they both have their value. So my remark is just two-part before I get to my suggestion, but the first part is that those correlational studies are really useful at looking at big term trends. And I thought Dr. Pastor had a bunch of good recommendations and for improving the cap and trade program. And what's harder to do with correlational studies is pinpoint changes in local air emissions to a specific policy. So I'm also interested in EJAC and Dr. Pastor's and Dr. Morello-Frosch's opinions on what about the rest of the AB 32 portfolio? Can things be done better for other climate policies to reduce local air emissions? And then with the causal studies, it's really impressive that Dr. Pastor kind of revised the Danae Hernandez-Cortez study. My read is still that the three causal studies, which really are designed only to answer one question, does the cap and trade program specifically reduce local air emissions? The answer is yes, but to varying degrees. And I think Dr. Pastor's study shows to take a hard look at the Danae Hernandez-Cortez numbers, but the direction of the numbers are okay. So I think that brings me to my suggestions to add into the mix. Dr. Catherine, I think you're probably right. This the larger rulemaking that's going on is not wholly focused on equity, but if you do believe the causal studies, then lowering the cap could be viewed as an equity-based solution, and that's primarily what the ongoing rulemaking is about. So I just wanted to flag that. And then I also wanted to re-elevate Kevin Hamilton's suggestions from the June and July meeting on addressing electricity and gas prices. So thanks. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, and thank you for the comprehensive discussion today.
Thank you. Next, we have Richard Grow. Richard, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Unmute. Hi, my comment today goes back to the really excellent cap and trade discussion and your guest speakers, Manuel Pastor and Rachel Morello-Frost. That was just mind-blowingly good. I'm encouraged to see the increasing clarity around the expression foregone reductions being used instead of often the reference to emission increases. And my comment goes to the significance of that. And it comes from my experience working at EPA's Region 9 office for several decades based in the AIR program, but on the EJ and civil rights end of that. And I saw a lot come across our office and my desk, our desks, regarding emissions trading, environmental justice, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And specifically in 1997, we got a complaint from the NAACP, the Center on Race, Poverty, and Environment, and Luke Cole, and Communities for Better Environment, Richard Drury, regarding a really significant emission trading program in the South Coast. And at the EPA Region 9 office, that issue was framed as a foregone reduction issue, a denial of benefits under civil rights, and EPA rejected the program. And then you go along from there to 2012. Again, we got a complaint, this time against this program, the AB 32 program, an excellent complaint, I think written primarily by Brent Newell on behalf of a number of organizations, including some out in the Valley. And I observed the senior decision-making there close up, different administration, different EPA management, especially Region 9. And they framed it. I observed these discussions. I was not part of it. They framed it as a potential emission increase issue. And based on that misunderstanding, based on the incompetence, I'd say, of some of our senior management, they rejected that Title VI complaint. They called it premature, but they rejected it. And the point is, framing the issue matters with regard to not only reality, but strategy. Framing the issue, seeing the issue as some of the papers referenced today did, basically understates the problem. The increased issue is a subset of the larger issue. In civil rights terms, foregone reductions constitutes denial of benefits. And part of the relevance of that is civil rights is a matter of law, which is a little different. I mean, it overlaps with, there's environmental justice, there's equity, and so on. But they're not in the law. I'm sorry, they should be. But civil rights law is being arguably violated here. So I understand the EJAC has not been up for pursuing the civil rights angle, but this is just a reminder and congratulations or acknowledgement. I'm really glad to see the foregone reductions issue highlighted there. Please hold on to that. It matters to a lot of folks, and it's the reality. These communities are being denied the benefits of air quality programs, public health protection. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Evan Edgar. Evan, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Hello, Evan Edgar on behalf of the California Compost Coalition. We make renewable natural gas and organic compost out of SB 1383 waste that would have gone to the landfill. That's one of the most cost-effective programs under cap and trade. So every year they put out the metrics and it's been highly successful. When we make organic compost, we sequester the carbon in the soil in the Healthy Soils program. So not to be confused with carbon capture in geological. It's always to make sure that those are confused at sometimes, but organic compost in the soil is the best type of sequester out there for a living system. And plus we've been supporting EJAC on your phase out of pesticides. We don't want pesticides out there. We want healthy soils with organic compost. Plus, our RNG we put right back into our fleet, and we've been carbon negative and will continue to be carbon negative for years to come using renewable natural gas in our near zero engines. It's a great program. It's a circular economy, which brings me to the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule and electric batteries. I want to thank EJAC for supporting the California Battery Directive that we've been discussing for the last 2 years about the need to have an independent verified third-party statement for carbon intensity. about having a supply chain that is ethical, without, sourcing and supply chain due diligence without digging up the Congo for cobalt with slave labor making blood batteries. And we support with regards to the end of recycling. So EJAC had a lot of great recommendations as part of the scoping plan that we supported. This so happens CARB hasn't got back to us on any of that, and back to the industry or back to EJAC about the batteries. What I do know, I've had a study on carbon intensity by Ricardo. I'm releasing next week to CARB. So CARB will have it that shows that ZEV batteries are carbon positive and they're not carbon negative, and that the refuse industry that I represent would like to stay on RNG that's carbon negative for years to come. What the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule is doing is forcing us into a carbon positive fleet, because batteries are not negative, they're not carbon neutral, they're carbon positive. So we have to give up this great circular economy system that makes organic compost and carbon negative fuel in order to pivot towards battery electric that is more expensive and and more carbon. So over the years, the 2 years I've been at CARB and EJAC stating this, you guys have been highly supportive with your policies. Just so happened CARB hasn't done anything about it for the last 2 years. And I'll be testifying next Thursday at CARB to remind them of their commitments in order to have carbon intensity for ZEVs and protecting those poor kids in the Congo who have to dig up the cobalt for electric batteries. We can't mine our way out of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I'll move back to Rita Loof. Rita, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Rita Loof, Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTEC International. And RADTEC is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of ultraviolet electron beam light emitting diode UVEB LED technology as a sustainable alternative for manufacturing. Our products are not formulated with VOCs, and they're all electric, so greenhouse gases are not emitted. Earlier in the meeting, a committee member mentioned warehouses. What we see in manufacturing, especially in clean manufacturing, that basically the businesses are moving out of California. But there is still a demand for goods, so the goods are being trucked in and stored in warehouses. The problem is that many of the policies at the local level act as barriers to the implementation of clean technologies like ours. As an example, the South Coast AQMD has rules like Rule 1151 for automotive coatings that treat all processes alike. Even when there are no VOC emissions, no greenhouse gases, and no toxic emissions. There are extensive reports required for processes like ours with no VOC emissions. So companies are literally required to report zeros over and over again. So I would urge the committee to look into the unintended consequences of local air district rules and how they have a negative impact on the implementation of the vision of the scoping plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make one last call for anyone who wants to provide a comment to raise their hand now. I'll wait a few seconds. Okay, so since I'm not seeing any hands up, we can go ahead and move forward to our next item. And I will turn over to our co-chairs if you have any thoughts on next steps and closing remarks.
I can go if Catherine. So several things were triggered by the public comments. And hello, Rita. So at some point, I think maybe we could set up a meeting with you to understand, because certainly a lot of us are working on local air district stuff, and that might be appropriate because we're very interested in learning about new cleaner technologies. And a lot of the work PSR does outside of the EJAC is figuring out safer, cleaner technologies, processes, green chemistry to figure out how we can start reducing harm at the fence line for communities. So I thank you for always coming to us and reminding us of that. And so, and I think some of the things you're doing are interesting around permitting. Like, couldn't we require in permitting that they use safer substitutions, cleaner processes that allow us to, again, take a harm reduction approach in protecting fence line communities. So thank you for that. And then someone brought up the issue of pesticides, and I'm sort of curious how CARB is doing so far on addressing the climate impacts of pesticide use, and in particular fumigants. I'm hoping maybe we can queue up for next meeting to find out about where we are on that. I understand that there is a study around fumigants, and I would love to hear a report back, and we can bring in some folks that have been working on this at the community level, because I think, if folks are talking about everything on the table to reduce greenhouse gases, and we can move beyond fumigants that are VOCs and produce greenhouse gases, then those are the kinds of everything on the table attitude that we need, right? Versus having to quantify how much greenhouse gases, which is important, but we also know that not using the fumigants and going to other safer processes can actually means no greenhouse gases, regardless of the amount. So, because I hear, the justification for a lot of bad things is, oh, it's going to reduce climate and we got to do everything. So in that toolbox of fumigants and doing everything, it's actually one, again, that reduces harm to fence line communities. And those are the kinds of actions that I think we should be prioritizing with our climate programs. And with that, I see that Matt has a comment as well.
Okay. I'm going to go off camera this time because I can be taught. I just wanted to second your call for revisiting those climate pollutant pesticides that are, some of which are egregious warmers, and bring it up within the context of the natural and working lands strategies that have been worked on in the Natural Resources Agency. I know I've had motions in both bodies to try to bring a joint meeting about, but at the very least, if the agenda will allow it, I would like to curate updates with regards to how Natural Resources Agency is handling our scoping plan and its natural working land scenario. Really positive recommendations in there that are perfectly in sync with the comments we just heard. So just calling for attention to that issue once more.
Thanks, Matt. All right. Last call to all of my fellow EJAC members.
I'll go ahead and just put out there, thank all the commenters today. It's Kevin Hamilton. And, we hear you. And we also understand the passion that comes with the work that you all do as well. Even though we may disagree on some of the solutions that I've heard proposed. I certainly recognize everybody's commitment to reducing these emissions. So thank you for coming today for sure, and for putting yourself out there in this meeting. Thank you.
All right.
I see we have.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I see we have one public comment, so I'm just going to move to that before we move back to Tom and Dr. Catherine. But we have a comment from Laura Rosenberger Hayter. Laura, your mic has been unmuted and you're now free to speak.
Oh, hello, this is Laura Rosenberger Hyder of Fresno's Against Fracking. We're against the mixing hydrogen with methane. Our energy company, PG&E, in Fresno is planning to mix hydrogen with methane, and the blending is creating more NOx emissions when it burns, and it's putting more NOx in the homes of people in such a disadvantaged area with high PM 2.5 and bad water quality, and it's like people of color, disadvantaged area. And but more important than that is that you should not give incentives to larger facilities. You should instead give the incentives to the smaller facilities, like the small organic family farms, not the big conglomerate factory farms. So no single disadvantaged community would become more polluted. But also, those all the pipes get brittle too from that hydrogen being put in. It could be a big leakage issue and climate change. But my most important need in particular is organic food, because without it, I won't be so dehydrated and dysfunctional. I would lose my job, and then I won't need any transportation to work, and I would not be able to afford electric at all, or any kind of air conditioner, or any gas, or any heating, and I won't buy any plastic plastic items or any things. I won't have any money. So I think the most important thing is the organic family farms for an investment, and bring water to them. And the hydrogen, most of the hydrogen they're putting in the pipelines is being made from fossil fuels, from natural gas, because companies do what's most cost effective right now. But in the long term, with all the health impacts and cumulative health impacts, I think the splitting of the water would be more cost effective eventually. But now is the time that makes the difference, is what's cost effective now. All right, thanks.
Thank you. And then I'll move to Tom.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just wanted to bring up this issue and hopefully get some feedback. I know we already concluded our LCFS discussion, LCSF, I always say it backwards. It came to my attention from somebody about the LCFS program possibly incentivizing what's known as chemical recycling. I'm trying not to use that term because it's really not recycling. It's basically chemical processing, or another type of incineration, which California is down to our last waste incinerator in California, and I know environmental justice in general is opposing these technologies because the toxics and the discussion that they're probably going to be cited in the same communities that had incinerators or other EJ disadvantaged communities. But under the LCFS, the alternative jet fuel says that these fuels can be made from non-petroleum sources. And if you look at the latest regulation language, it actually has in the definition of a petroleum product, it specifically exempts plastics, which are made from petroleum. So number one, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me at all, that you're trying to make fuels not from petroleum, but you would possibly be allowing plastics, which comes from petroleum. And just have some other notes from this concerned person about using some of these subsidies to actually promote and incentivize things like this chemical recycling being done in California. It seems like an maybe easy fix would be to take that definition of a petroleum product out, or at least the part that excludes plastics or plastics products. And so I'm wondering, with the stage that we're at with LCFS, if this can be done, how this can be done, who I should talk to about this issue. And I can just leave it there for now. I have more information about this concern that I'd be happy to bring up at another time. I don't know if we could put it on an agenda for the next meeting, but I don't know if that would be too late for that to be part of the LCSF process. So just putting that out there, would appreciate any help that I can get on addressing that issue.
Hey, Tom, this is Chanel. Can I just follow up with you directly? Like, I'll literally send you an email right now to touch base on this because I think that the timing is important and I hear you and what you're bringing up. Is that cool?
That would be great. I appreciate
Yep.
that.
And if you can include me as well, because they also reached out, and I'm really glad you brought it up, Tom, because it's trying to figure out when do I bring it up. I don't, maybe it's too late to wait to the next meeting. So yeah, so thank you.
This is Dr. Catherine. I would just quickly add my gratitude to the committee members, the members of the public, the CARB staff and decision makers, everybody who engaged and participated today, and the carbon markets work group will be internally working on a draft resolution, and the CCUS stack work group will continue to refine the draft resolution in preparation for next month's meeting. So if folks are not already engaged in those conversations and want to be, please be in touch. Otherwise, we meet again in August. I don't know if staff have the date handy, but otherwise, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Catherine. Just lastly, we wanted to inform everyone that today's meeting is our last meeting where CARB is acting as the facilitator. As we mentioned earlier, we have secured a contract for a neutral third-party facilitator and technical writer, Jane Harrington, who is here with us today, and Eric Douglas from Leading Resources, and they'll be working with EJAC moving forward. They'll also be facilitating our next month's meeting, which falls on August 16th, and we're very much looking forward to working together. So that's all for today. The time is now 3:52 p.m., and this concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Bye-bye.